Hello everyone, Coop here. Welcome to another tutorial video. This one's actually going to be a bit of an update as such to an older tutorial, just because I've had a bit of feedback about it lately and thought it might be a good idea to finally get off my butt and do something about it. The old tutorial in question is this one here, the deactivate objects when far from player. It's a little tutorial just covering basically how to deactivate and reactivate objects as they get further and further away and closer to the player. Intended as a sort of very basic optimization system for when you have quite a few objects in your scene and they're causing you a bit of an FPS drop. Sometimes this can help. It sort of depends on what your problem is, though, as to whether it will be very helpful for you. But anyway, I released it about a year ago and I've since learned how to do things a little better, and there are a few problems with it, so I was hoping to address that in this video. If you go back to that original tutorial, I have published a bit of an update there, and I'll update it again once this video is done, but that update sort of very briefly details what was wrong with it. So if you are a long time watcher and you have sort of checked that old video out and it did cause you any problems, I do apologize. I'm terribly sorry. Hopefully this video will help you out. For anyone just checking out this video that hasn't actually done this one, I'll chuck a link in the description and at the end of the video, so it might be worth having a bit of a look at, because this tutorial is actually going to be building on that. I'm going to be using all the same scripts and objects, etc. So it might just help if you've already done that tutorial. If not, you're welcome to try and follow along, see how you go. Anyway, so it's exactly the same. It's the old tutorial. I've still got the old scripts in it. I have added one to do a couple of extra things, but that's not relevant to what you're going to need to try and do, but I'll show you that as we go. So the problems that we might have had in the original tutorial, and I think this should still be working as it did originally. We can sort of see that as we move around the world, the cubes, as they're close to the player, are active, and as we move away from them, they sort of deactivate themselves and are no longer really contributing very heavily to an FPS drop. And it's good because this doesn't require their colliders, it doesn't require anything other than the object sort of registering itself in the beginning, and that way you can safely deactivate the whole object and know that it's not causing you any sort of problems. Now, why this might have caused a few issues for people, so I'll bring up the item activator script that we had in the original tutorial, and this is the one that does most of the work. This is the script that's constantly running and checking and seeing which objects need to be active and which ones don't. Now, it does all of that in a coroutine, and I enumerate here check activation, and that, it's not a problem. It works well for the setup I've got here, but if you're starting to spawn a few objects as the game progresses, which you generally will, and you start getting a lot of objects in your scene, you might want to say break up this function here, the for each check of the main activator items list, because that's going to be the biggest list. That's going to have the most objects in it at any point in time. So you might find that you start getting to a point where you've got a lot of objects. You could hash tables would be a very, very good thing here, but if you want to keep things fairly simple, not that they're difficult, but if you want to keep things fairly simple and you want to keep using this, one thing you might do is you might start adding in another one of these wait for second checks sort of in the for each loop itself. So it's a very basic example. You might throw it at the end here, so every time it does an item, it does all these checks, makes it active, makes it inactive, whatever. It then waits for a second, or 0.1 of a second, 0.01 of a second. That's quite low. That's probably not actually doing a lot. It's basically that'll just tell it to wait for a frame, I think. But yeah, it'll do that, it'll wait, and then it'll move on to the next item. And what that will do is it'll give the effect in the game. It'll slow things down and smooth them out, and it'll make the whole process a bit smoother. So if you're using this and you start getting a lot of objects in your scene and it starts lagging, or you get FPS drop from it, that is one way of getting around it, is by sort of slowing this loop down. You will see a noticeable sort of effect in the game. You will see your items becoming active or inactive a little bit slower. There'll be a delay. That's not a perfect sort of way to implement that. It's just a very basic example. You'd play with it to sort of find what works for you. But anyway, that is one way that people would do it, and this might start causing you problems because coroutines sort of run around everything else. They can be I want to say they can be interrupted, so to speak. There's a fair bit to them, a lot of which I don't understand as well, but if you're not familiar with them, have a read. But they can be interrupted. So why this is a problem is if we go to this new script I've created that I've called test spawn. It's very basic. All it does is what's that, 0.1 of a second. Every 0.1 of a second, it's going to instantiate a new cube. So one of those a new one of these little blue cubes here, and it's going to chuck that randomly in the world. And what's going to happen then is that if we go to the disable if far away, this is the script attached to every one of these cubes. If we go to this, we'll actually see that it's going to delay for a second, and then it's going to add itself to the list. So if you imagine that this list is checking itself, and it's going to be running fairly continuously, and it's going to be almost constantly iterating through this list. And as we know, if you try and modify a list while you're iterating through it, you're going to have problems. It's going to give you weird errors. So this becomes a problem. And I'll show you exactly how it becomes a problem. I'll see if I can get this to work. I had it working before, so forgive me if it doesn't this time. I'll just go back to Unity when I get it. There we go. And I'll just go to the cube holder, which is what I've attached the spawning script to. And you'll see this working fairly quickly. And we should get errors virtually straight away. There we go, we have. And you can see all the cubes creating themselves. You know, it's horrible. It's just an example. You don't need that script for anything. It's just to show you what can happen. And I'm just going to pause that, and if we have a look at this error, this is the really annoying, horrible error you will get whenever you have issues with your lists. I call it horrible because, you know, normally you click on an error, it'll take you to your script and tell you exactly where you're having problems. In this, you actually have to dig around because it won't do that. It'll just sort of highlight the object that's having, or highlight the area that's having the problem, and you have to sort of dig through it to see where that's actually happening. So there it is, item activator line 33, which if we go to that, it's probably, where is it? Line 33, what do we got? 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so there. It doesn't really tell you where in that loop it's having problems. It doesn't tell you what's tried to interrupt. It's a really annoying error. But what it essentially means is that list is having issues. Something's trying to modify it while you're iterating through it. And that's a problem. So, okay, how do we work around that? As we know, we can't interrupt the list. We can't get in the road of that list sorting itself out. So if we're iterating through it, we need to make the changes either prior to doing that iteration or after. And we've sort of already done that a little bit if you have a look. So when we remove items through the list, that's exactly what we're doing. We're waiting until the check is finished, and then we do the remove afterwards to ensure that we're not interfering with the actual checking of the list up here, the iteration. Now that works, and it works because the check up here is sort of independent of that. It doesn't matter. Like, this is never going to be, it's never going to interrupt this, it's never going to interfere with it. Whereas when an item is adding itself sort of independent of the activator script, you know, it could happen at any time in the game. You don't know when it's going to occur, so you need to account for that. And probably the easiest way to do this, and I sort of mentioned it in the update to the other video, is to create like a buffer list or a queue for items to go in before they actually go into the main item activator items list. So we'll try and set that up now. The first thing I'm going to do is change the activator items list to private, because it doesn't need to be public. We're going to create a new public list now. Same as before. What is it? List. There we go. Of activator items. What will we call it? We'll just call it the add list. I don't know. That'll do. Something like that. Add list. Now we could chuck that at the start of the coroutine, but as we know, coroutines can be interrupted, and we don't want this to be. We want this to run like instantly, so to ensure that nothing's going to interrupt it and try and add anything to the list. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a new function here. We'll call it void add to list. And what do we need to put in here? So the first thing, actually no, we need to make sure that that list is ready to go, so we'll do that first. In the start function, we'll say add list is equal to a new list of activator items, similar to what we did above with the activator items list. So it's ready to go now. So when the add to list function runs, what do we want to do? We want to check that add list. So we're going to add the objects to the add list, we're going to check it here, and then we're going to add them to the activator items list from there. So we'll say if add list.count is greater than 0, so if there's actually something in it, we'll say for each activator item in add list. So for each one of these things in the add list, we'll just say if, what is it? If item dot, is it my item? Item dot item. Sorry, it's been a while. If it does not equal null, so we're just going to quickly check, make sure the item hasn't been destroyed since the last time this function was run, because that's possible. So if the item isn't null, if it's actually an item, what are we going to do? We're going to say activator items list dot add. We're just going to add the item to it. Pretty straightforward. So when this runs, we're just going to check the add list for everything in it. We're going to check to make sure it's not null. If it's valid, if it's a good object that still exists, we're going to add it to the activator items. Once we've done the for each loop, we're just going to say add list dot clear to clear the list out, similar to sort of what we do with the rem list. So we're just clearing the list out to make sure there's nothing left in it. Once we've done all this, we're just going to start the coroutine. Check activation. There we go. I could have copy pasted that, but whatever. And instead of running the coroutine, we're going to run the add to list function instead. And at the end of check activation, at the end of the coroutine, we're going to get rid of that. We're going to say add to list. So the coroutine is going to run. It's going to do all its good stuff. It's going to, be happy, activate, deactivate, do its thing. Once it's done all that, it's going to run that function, and that function should hopefully not get interrupted by anything. That will just run instantly, and for any new items, it'll add them to the list, and then once it's done, it'll clear itself out, and then let this do what it needs to do. So, in theory, the add list will just sit there as a bit of a queue while objects are created. They'll add themselves to the list. When the coroutine's ready, then it will do the add to list, add everything to it, and then continue to do what it does. So in theory, that should stop those errors from occurring, or at the very least, if they're going to occur, it's going to be like a 1 in, I don't know, millions of chance. I hope. Why is this complaining? Oops, yep, we need to change something else. I'm being silly. I do that a lot. Sorry, guys. If we go back to, what do we need to go to? Disable if far away, because we don't want to add to the activator items list anymore. We want to add to the add list. In the disable script, just change that to add list, which is, there. So that's basically where it adds itself. There's another thing we could probably do as well. We don't actually need to be storing the position of the object. That could become problematic if your objects move around the world and you're checking against that position, because that position is going to always be static, so to speak. It's always going to be the initial start position of the object. So we can probably get rid of that. I'll just do that now. I'm just going to clear out the item pos. If we go to the activator, go down to the class, I'm just going to get rid of item pos. Means we just need to change a couple of things. And instead of item pos here in the check, we'll just say item.item.transform.position. That's all we need to do instead. Don't think that should cause any problems, but that way it'll stay up to date. If the object moves around the world, it won't be using its initial start point anymore. So that might have been another problem people were having. Apologies if you did. Cool. I think that's all we need. Sweet. So let's go back to Unity. That error's gone. It's happy. The cube holder's still going to be spawning objects. Yes, it is. And I'm getting a bunch of warnings down there because it's an old project. Don't worry about them. Alright, if we give this a try, it should hopefully not give us any errors. And there we go. So you can see here there's quite a lot of cubes. It's going to basically keep doing that. I probably won't keep this open too long. It'll hate life. But if we move around, we can see it's still, pretty smooth. There's a bit of a delay there because we did slow down the checking. It's nothing problematic though. But it's handling all those extra objects, and it's sort of doing it fairly smoothly, and it's not causing any problems, which is always a cool thing. But yeah, that should take care of it. So if you have any questions, leave us a comment. Please like this video, and if you haven't already, subscribe. Hopefully you'll get a bit more content out for you soon. Been a bit slack the last week or two, I apologise. I'll get my act together at some point or another. But otherwise, thanks for watching guys, it's always a pleasure, and hopefully I'll see you next time. See ya.